Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you. You look wonderful. I will hand the mic over to Howard Isaacson for the formal introduction.
All right, thank you. So here's a very formal introduction. Welcome. We want to thank everyone for being here this morning. Today's a very, very, very big day. We've got Mitzi Schaefer of the nationally renowned firm GSB Fundraising Consultants. The G stands for Gronlund, Robert Gronlund, if I recall. But we have in our company our dear friend Glenn Gronlund and Shirley Gronlund, who are closely related to Robert. And Glenn actually, some folks say that most of the intellect that's in GSP today came from Brother Gronlund rather than Robert Gronlund. But we will leave that to the folks up in Minnesota to debate. Anyway, I will introduce Mitzi in a moment, but we will start with an opening prayer from Reverend Dr. Blees.
Good morning. Good morning. This shifts from being a mask to a beard. Chin hammock. I like that. I just feel that added support here this morning. Let me add my voice of welcome. And, you know, this is going to be an exciting journey. And here you all are on the first step of that journey where we get to tell stories and learn how to tell stories. And Mitzi, we're just thrilled that you're down here to help us with that. There are a lot of stories in this room. And that's going to be part of our challenge is you know, how do we harness all those stories? As you know, this is not a reticent group that's come together. So it'll be easy to tell the stories, but then how to tell them well, how to tell stories that connect with the whole congregation. So we're just thrilled that you're here for, again, this is a very important exercise. We are requesting Mass today, as we will on Sunday. We've taken some steps back, and even on our own staff, now we have 2 of our staff who are quarantined because their children got COVID. So we just want to be extra cautious as we're in the room together for so long this morning. Join me in a word of prayer. Lord, be with you.
And also with you.
So with you.
Good and gracious God, what a delight that we can be here this morning. It's a beautiful morning, and once again, nature praises your holy name. We see it in the clouds and the blue sky and in the water, and we see it in those who have gathered. For indeed, when your people gather together, Lord, we see your presence and sense your presence and pray that your Holy Spirit would guide everything that we say and do. Indeed, that we would recognize what you have been doing for so many years in the life of this community, in the life of Emmanuel, in the life of individual people who were gathered. Lord, as we tell our stories, we want to give you glory. Bless us toward that end. We pray this all in the name of Jesus. Amen.
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 Thank you. It's all yours, Mitzi.
It's all mine. Okay, very good. Well, I want to share my welcome as well. It is a powerful thing when your congregation invites you to be a storyteller. We have so many stories in congregations all across the land, and sometimes we tell them and sometimes we don't. But it is an important story to tell. It's God's story that we tell when we tell how our lives and the lives of others were impacted because of the work that God is doing through those who are here at Emmanuel. So thank you for being here this morning. Thank you for taking the time. I do want to do just a little bit of a disclosure of what we're going to learn today. So this training is a comprehensive training on telling stories that influence people for impact. And so there are some components in here about evaluating your current communications. There are components in here about where to use those communications. I'm not going to skip over those things. I know there are folks in the room who won't be a part of deciding where emails are going to go and how they're going to be shared. The staff team is going to be doing that this afternoon. But I do think it's valuable information for you all to have, to understand the purpose of how we tell stories and why we tell them using this model. It's important to know how we're going to use them. And so I'm not going to skip over that information. So if that information worries you a little, if you start to think, oh, this is not what I do, that's okay. I promise you, you have a very strong staff who have already shown their value to me just in the less than 24 hours that I've been here, that they know exactly what to do. So we'll be letting them do those parts, but I do think it's important for you to have that information. So I want to start this morning by talking about evaluating and what it means to evaluate how you are sharing stories right now. And so our first, oh wait, I have to point this way. No. Where do I point?
You turned it on?
It was on. It says it's on. It just needs to be reminded that it's on. It just needs to be reminded that it was on. There you go. Okay. So, so when we're evaluating how we share stories, I have a couple questions for those of you in the room who aren't the folks sending the emails. Who gets a lot of emails? Who looks at every single email that you get? Every single one. Read them all. Oh my goodness, I am so impressed. That's awesome. That's
not yet.
okay. So we get a lot of content in the world today. Everybody is vying for our time and our attention. They want us to hear their message. And the things that matter most to us are the things that we look at. But even the things that matter most to us, if they are buried inside of lots of other information, our brains just are too tired to go there. I know mine is. And so what's really important is the congregation has a really important message to share, really important stories, really important information. And so along the way, we're going to be evaluating how we share that information to make sure that what our folks are getting is the content that they want and that they have the brain space. In our family, we call it COVID fog. We're all living in COVID fog because there's all these new things that we have to do. And so we're going to evaluate how we're getting information to you. So some of the questions the staff are going to be talking about this afternoon as we plot out the future are, does every word of our newsletter inspire giving and belonging? And belonging is the really important piece. So when folks belong, they are a part of something. It's theirs. They own it. They care for it. They steward it. They take care of it. And so that's one of the questions that we're going to be asking. Does it have an emotional draw? Does it have one simple call to action? Lots of times I get emails and down inside there are like all of these things that I can click. And I might even be interested in all of those things. But once I click off of one and then I get interrupted by something else that comes into my life, I don't go back to those other things that are important. And so we're going to be talking about how many calls to action we have in a single email. Does social media encourage a join me culture? I have sat in lots of councils and boards where I have heard the phrases, well, if they would only, they should, they need to do more. Why don't they? That is not a join me culture. A join me culture sounds like, let me tell you about this really cool worship service I just attended and how awesome it was and what I got from it. And I invite you to come with me next time. That's a join me culture. And so we're going to be evaluating our messaging to listen for those two different kinds of messages. Are we making enough deposits for the level of withdrawals? Now, we had a great conversation about this last night at dinner as we were getting to know each other, and I'm going to dive deeper into that in just a minute. So just hold that one for a second. And then, are your note cards and those things that you share, are they timely and are they personal? And that's really for staff. I just want you to know that that's what we're going to be talking about. And does your ask for impact, or does it ask for stuff? Okay, so those are other things that we're going to be talking about as we move forward. So deposits versus withdrawals. So I can't teach you about storytelling without telling you a story. So when about 20 years plus ago, my husband and I were on the staff of a camp up in North Carolina. And he was going to be the servant camp area director, and I was in charge of the snack bar because I had never been there before. I wasn't a counselor. I didn't know the community. I had grown up in a different denomination, married this guy, met at a Lutheran college, and here I now find myself at a Lutheran camp. And the program directors, Pastors Tim and Pastor Mary, said, you need to treat your campers like debit cards. And I was like, what? Debit cards? What does that mean? And they said, we want you to be camper first. We all have debit cards. We all have credit cards. I personally don't like to use my debit card because I think sometimes it's a little more vulnerable than a credit card. But when we treat our campers like debit cards, it means we have to make deposits into the relationship before we can expect a withdrawal, right? That's how a debit card works. A credit card, you spend and spend and spend. You got your stuff right then, right? You got that thing that you want or need, but you have to pay it back, and usually with interest. It's gonna come due. You can't avoid it. And so when we treat campers like debit cards, then what we're saying and what they were telling us is you have to make deposits into that relationship with that camper before you can expect a withdrawal. So a deposit looks like remembering their name, asking them how they're doing, helping them get through the morning for the first time without their parents and making sure they brush their teeth before they walk up the mountain, right? Playing games with them, listening to them, reading them stories before they go to bed. That's how we make deposits into the life of the camper. And then when they need to do that scary thing, jumping in the pool for the first time, or sleeping away from home for the first time, I've made enough deposits to get that withdrawal, to get that behavior that I need that camper to do to make sure they have the best week possible. And so as I grew up and left being a camp counselor and went into the world, you know, the big bad world that nobody prepares you for, I started at a Methodist children's home. Well, that was easy to apply camper first. We had 150 clients on our campus who had been abused or neglected, and they were there for healing. They were there to get away from the trauma and to learn how to navigate the trauma and to grow. And so as I started thinking about what it means, I realized, well, I could be client first. And then as I moved into a position where I started supervising staff, I thought, oh, I need to be staff first. And then as I started thinking about those people who give to the organization, I realized I need to be donor first. Now, we had a great conversation last night, so this is one of the few questions I'm going to ask you today. Donor is a word that a lot of organizations use. It means a person who gives to the organization or to the ministry. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about how you see yourself. What one word or two-word phrase would you use to describe your relationship to Emmanuel? If you think of that, just raise your hand and I'll point at you.
Maybe enabler.
Enabler, okay.
Because with the funds, you're enabling.
Okay, I like that. Yes.
Encourager.
Encourager, good, okay.
Partner.
Partner, great, okay. Good. Others? Organizer. Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah. Who feels like they have more than one role here? So anybody feel like one word's not enough? Yeah, that's good. So, so I will very easily fall into the habit today of saying donor first. When you hear me say that, what I'd like you to do is think about how you relate to Emmanuel and translate that for yourself as you think about what that means as you go forward together, okay? So when we are donor first, organizer first, enabler first, partner first, family first, faces first, that was one of the words that we came up with last night, giver first, worshiper first, when we are putting our people first, we are making deposits into their lives before we have an expectation of a withdrawal. Okay, and that is really important. So when we evaluate our communications that are going out from here and how we talk about what it is we want people to do and how we want them to react or respond or engage, we're going to be asking the question, have we made enough deposits? And being donor first or all those things first is not a tactic. Okay, I cannot express that enough. It is an attitude. Because God has entrusted us with every single one of you. And God has entrusted every single one of us here with the people who aren't here, but who are already connected, and the people who aren't connected yet. Those folks have all been entrusted to us so that they too know that God loves them. So we're going to make sure that we're making more deposits than we are withdrawals. Okay, so you will hear me use that language. It's not about money, it's about relationship. Okay, so how do we do that? So as again, back to my story. As I set out to raise money for this Methodist Children's Home at Worth, is the name of it, 125-year-old organization. They had some not great history. They had a president that had run their endowment down about $16 million. And they had to close the school that was on campus. And as I was going out and talking to people, I realized they thought Epworth had closed. Not that the school, a particular program or component of the ministry had closed, but that the whole thing had closed. And they were very surprised. And then other people really just didn't know what we did there. They just had no idea. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to tell stories. And so I started talking to the kids, and they really couldn't tell me their stories. It was their story, they were living it, but they really couldn't tell me. And so then I did this thing, I said, okay, staff, I would like for you to tell me a story about one of the kids in your cottage. Couldn't do it. What they wanted to tell me was about their behaviors, or that they didn't get up for school that day, or that they ran away again, or that they had a meeting with their family that afternoon. And so I realized, man, I'm gonna have to do the work. I'm gonna have to figure out how to get these stories out of folks so that they know, they understand what I'm asking for, but also they're too busy. They're too busy to give me all this information. So as I started thinking and writing and listening, what came about without me realizing it is what I call the saga model. So every time I started asking them about the children in interviews, what I heard was how they are today, what they were doing right now. And I said, yeah, but how were they before, like when you first got them? And that's when the click happened, you know, like when the light bulb turns on. That's when it happened. Children were coming in with pain-based behaviors. They were coming in fearful or hoarding food because they had been hungry, all kinds of things. And then now the staff are telling me they're making good grades. They're not running away anymore. They're not screaming every time they ask them to do something. And what came from that is, hey staff, guess what? You made that change happen. Your training, your relationship building, the deposits that you made changed the lives of those children. Sometimes it felt like it took forever, but it still was transformation. It still was change. And so there's a change that happens in the life of those that we serve. There is an agent of change. In that case, it was the staff or the volunteers, the people who were mentoring or who were cottage parents, who were coming into their lives, building relationships, making deposits so that the withdrawals that they needed, the behaviors that they needed would happen, and that child's life would be fuller and more enriched. And so there's an agent of change. Now, in your case, and we had a great conversation about this last night too, God is the agent working through the people of Emmanuel to change the lives of those that you serve. So as we're listening for stories, we're going to listen for where is God in all this. You all have a strong sense of the word call. Thank you, my Southern friend. You all have a strong sense of using call language here, and I am so impressed by that. Boy, our churches need that. And God is calling you and tugging at you and encouraging you and moving you forward to do those things so that the change can happen. Because friends, if there's no change, then why do it? If you're not changing lives, then why are you here? Right? So you're obviously doing it. And I've heard so many stories already. Then the next thing is that there is a gift. There is a gift always, that makes it possible to have those folks in place who can make that change. The generosity of the people make it possible. When I listen to Pastor Will and Pastor Jose talk about baptizing 12 people in their respective ministries, They are possible because of the generosity of the community. They don't just appear. They don't just happen, right? You all make that possible.
Amen.
And that is the story of how the agent of change is provided, the generosity of the people. And so then there is an ask that gets to that gift. We're not going to focus so much on those two things today. We're going to be focusing on how to listen for the change and how God is working through you all to be the agent of change. Okay? All right. So I'm going to tell you now, you are going to have homework at the end of this. Okay? You didn't know that. I hope you knew that. So your homework is going to be, and I'll talk about this more in detail, but I'm telling you this now so you'll listen when I say these things, right? So your homework is going to be to identify, interview, and write for 1 to 3 stories. Now, if that totally freaks you out, don't worry. It's okay. There are lots of people in the room, okay? But if you feel so called to do that, that is my challenge to you, right? God makes us uncomfortable sometimes, right? That's how we grow. So when you think about who you're going to be interviewing, and as you're interviewing them, which I'm going to train you on, I want you to be listening for a couple of things, okay? I want you to listen for what happens before the change. Where was that person's life before the change happened? They needed something, right? Maybe if we're talking about Park Church, they needed food. And it was as simple as that. And that got them in the line, that introduced them to somebody else, that built their relationship, that got them into worship, that got them into that pool. Okay? But they needed something, or they wouldn't have been there. Now, if we're the kind of person who's been going to church our whole lives, it can be a challenge to think about what we needed, right? We go through our day every day, just normal. This is what we do. We go to church on Sunday, kind of thing. But I've heard way too many stories already to think that you're all just complacently happy sitting wherever you are. I just don't believe it. I know there are stories. I know that the education that's happened here, the connectivity to other communities is happening, and that does something. It does something for you, and it does something for others who are a part of the congregation and community. So what are the behaviors or the feelings that were before? Okay, and before might have been a week ago, and it might have been 20 years ago, it might have been 50 years ago, but there was a before. Okay, and then listen for the agent of change. What was done specifically, and this is the hardest part, okay? Because we like to focus on the after. We like to focus on the things that have happened or the numbers that have happened. But we're talking about in someone's life, what was actually offered. So let's go back to my story, right? We have a child who comes into a children's home who has pain-based behaviors. They're yelling, they don't trust, they're running away, they're hitting, they're screaming, they're hiding, you name it, okay? And the staff are deploying a particular model or a particular program to walk alongside them to help them recognize those behaviors and to create a different response. They're identifying the trauma. They're creating a safe place for them to talk about it. There's a lot of things that they're doing that are building on this ability for the child to change. And that's happening here. Some Bible study that you heard took you deeper for the first time, right? Some person that you met left a lasting impression because they gave you a coin and wanted you to pass that along and pray for somebody else. There are things and people that have transformed your life and the lives of those who are connected to the community because of something that happened, or some things that happened. Maybe it's the pure gift of consistency. Or that I know if I'm in the hospital, I can call my pastor. I have a very dear friend who is not connected to the church. I met her through quilting. And when her father-in-law died, her mother-in-law had no one to call. No one. And she called me to say, what does she do? Like, nobody's bringing her a casserole. Nobody's coming over to pray for her. In her greatest time of grief, she realizes how alone she really is. And we have that, and we don't always realize that there are people who don't have that. And that in itself can change us, to know that we belong to a community where God has welcomed us and given us that safe space. That creates change. Okay, it frees us to do that for someone else. So I did it. I stepped in. I called. I prayed, because I had been taught to do that by my church, right? And so God was present, and that was the message I got to say. God's still present. So there's an agent of change. And then where are we now after the change? After this, and that's ongoing. When we're a part of, so my children at Epworth, the goal is to get them somewhere and then get them reunited, and then they're gone. We don't know their story after. We don't know what happens after. But you all are connected, and you remain connected. And so this is an ongoing cycle. So what I've heard the staff say a lot is, oh, they have lots of stories, right? Because you don't just have one story. You do. You have lots of stories because you've been connected for a long time. And so after the change, though, what were the feelings and behaviors? How are they different? That's really critical when we're telling the story. So as you're interviewing folks, there are some questions to help get you started. Now, what I want you to hear more than anything else is that these are not stories of timeline, okay? I have been working this morning and last night to figure out your timeline, because I need that to help me do my work with you the best. The stories that we're going to be listening for are not, I joined the church this day, and then I started going to this Bible study, and then I started helping at Emmanuel Parks giving out food. That's a timeline, okay? So the questions that we're going to be working on are to help get people past the timeline, because you all have a connection. You all have a way that you are a part. You have your own emotions. They're going to have their own emotions connected. And the way that we tell the story is connected to our emotions, our timeline. When we share our timeline, it's because in our minds and in our hearts, we have this like little happy joy thing that comes up, and that's what we want to share, okay? But unless I know all of that, I can't learn what the change is if I'm just the person reading the story, right? So people have short attention spans. We got to get right to the guts of it. we can't take them through our whole timeline. They don't have the space in their brains for that. Remember COVID fog? I mean, like, I had it before COVID, but you know what I'm saying. So the questions that we're going to start with: how did you find or come to be part of Emmanuel? That's a great way to start. That's going to help them, like, what is that searching out thing that you're looking for? Where were they before? Tell me about life before Emmanuel. That's a great question. you're going to start hearing, well, I didn't have. Listening for, I didn't have. What are you most thankful for? That question is going to help you get at the agent of change. And I would put money on it, you're going to hear the name of a person when you ask that question. And don't believe, friends, that you sitting here aren't the agents of change that God is working through, because you are going to hear yourself in some of these stories. What was missing in your life before? So if you are having trouble getting at that what was missing is really going to help them pause and think about that. Now, here's what they're going to do. They're going to go, oh, I don't know. And what I want you to do is to pause and let the Spirit work in their silence. If you are the next one to speak, you will make them lose their train of thought. You just ask them a very important question, and we need to give them space to process it internally. Some people are external processors, some people are internal processors. And so if you're sitting across from somebody that's an internal processor, you've got to give them time to get through, okay? And then they're going to say it. So don't be tempted to fill the silence with my Southern coming out. All right. How long have you been involved? So that's a timeline question, and that one you need to reserve for special. Don't just go in and ask all these. These are optional, right? So as you're listening, if they're having trouble getting at the change, there are ways to go deeper. And asking the timeline, whatever it is, how long have you been involved, they're going to pick up on that thing that was really important to them. And that's the thing they're going to talk about. Okay? And so you can latch on to whatever that is, and you can go deeper. Okay? So that's a reason for asking that question. Did you want to be here? I mean, I can imagine some of the folks who started by picking up food at park didn't want to have to do that, right? And so that's going to open the door to help you see what was really going on before, how they got there. What were you looking for? People don't just show up at church hoping to find nothing. I mean, I don't know anybody that does, right? They were looking for something. And whatever it was they were looking for, that's where the change, that's where there was something missing in their life, okay? Okay, so questions that get at the agent of change. What moment or person stands out the most for you as having an impact, okay? And chances are, if you're interviewing someone, you have a relationship with them, it might be you. Just humbly listen and keep going. Let them tell you the story, okay? I did this with a church recently, and the first, 5 or 6 stories that I read all had this person named Sarah in them. I was like, y'all got a gold mine in this Sarah person here. You need to pay attention to that. But then Sarah was a staff person, right? Sarah was the connector in the congregation. Their generosity made it possible for Sarah to be there. And that showed them how important that particular position was to the life of the community, okay? What made you stay? People don't stay if something good isn't happening in their hearts, right? Something made them stay. What means the most to you about Emmanuel? That's going to help get at what that agent is, the thing that's filling their need, the thing that's filling their void. And it may be that it's that you're service-minded and they have a call and a longing to serve. And y'all might not know this, but a lot of churches don't do that. And you all are doing that. And this is a place that they want to do it, but they don't know how, right? And you've created a space for them to have the how. That's an agent of change, okay? And then how are things different for you now? Okay, so you gotta get that agent and then move to the next piece is where do you find yourself now? And that's gonna help get them there. Now, I have sat across from a lot of people to interview them. And there are occasions where I have to say, I just don't think I'm gonna get anything out of this. Some people just aren't able to tell the story or to process or to talk out loud about things, and that is okay. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen on occasion, okay? And so I have just instinctively come up with some more questions that help me just make sure, before I just chalk this interview up, let me just make sure that I can't get anything out of it, okay? And so my favorite question is, can you say more about that? Because what happens is they say it the first time and they processed it and thought about it. And by asking them to say more about that, you're giving them a chance to think about what they said and reframe it and get it out differently. And every time they do, they're going to share a little bit more. And they're going to just naturally go a little bit deeper. Okay? Can you say that differently? I say that one a lot too. Sometimes they say something so good, I want to quote. and I can't say it exactly the way they said it because it would just make the story feel jumbled or whatever. And so can you say that differently helps me grab that quote, or it gives them, again, that same space that say more about that, gives them to rethink something. What would you tell someone else considering Emmanuel? That is going to give you the PowerPoint, the connectivity, the place where they saw God at work in these spaces. Because they're not going to tell somebody else to come because the coffee's good. I mean, we're not Starbucks, right? We're God's space, God's church, God's people. And so that's what's going to get at those pieces. Questions. Now, to refer back to like how you use it, when you use it, how you set up the interview, those kinds of things. So when I'm asking someone for an interview, remember, I have to have deposits first. Asking someone for an interview is a withdrawal. And for some people, it is a bigger withdrawal than it is for others, because that terrifies them to think about telling their own story. Well, what story would I have to tell? Or I'm not comfortable talking in front of people, or whatever it might be, okay? So remember that when you are approaching people for an interview, okay? So what I like to say is, and I would, so here are two things that are always deposits, okay? Ready? Truth and transparency. Friends, those are always deposits. Every single time you speak the truth, even if people don't want to hear it, it's still a form of a deposit. Or transparency, okay? So, hey, our Emmanuel Church is going through a process of telling stories. We know our stories are important. We know that we can learn from them and share from them and grow deeper in our relationships with God and with each other if we tell our stories. And I believe that you have a story to tell. And I would love to sit down with you for 30 minutes and get your story. Simple as that. It's not, hey, can I interview you? Hey, I need, remember, need is a withdrawal word. So that's how we ask them. And then when I'm sitting across from them, I do a couple things to make sure that they understand how this is going to work. Okay? Transparency. all right? The first is my role as the person interviewing you is to capture the feeling that I get from you telling me your story. That right there has established that I am not going to say everything they tell me. I am not going to list their timeline. I am looking for the feeling that I get when I hear their story. And the thing I hear more than anything else after the homework is from students is I feel so refreshed and energized from this process. What a gift to hear the stories of others. So here's what's going to happen for my brand new people who have never done this before. You're going to get so excited about the story, you're going to forget to take notes. Because you're going to be so into the story, and it's going to feel so good to hear it. Don't forget to take notes, okay? But what you're trying to do is capture the feeling the person had when something was missing from their life. And the feeling they have now that God is filling that gap. That's the feeling that we're going for when we're listening for the stories. So that's the first thing I make sure to tell them. The second thing I make sure to tell them is I don't know when or where these stories are going to be used. Because you don't, right? Because we don't know until we hear the story, because we're going to use them purposefully and intentionally. And so if we have this new thing coming up at communities, then we're going to drop a community story in line with that announcement. If we have a new thing coming up with Alive or with a family retreat, we're going to drop a family retreat story right in line with when we're making that announcement. This is very strategic, okay? So you cannot promise that they're even going to be used, but when they're going to be used or how they're going to be used. So it's really important that you say that. I'm the story gatherer. I can't promise how and when we're going to use these stories. And then we don't let them read them. Okay, and I'll let you sit on that for just a second, right? Because if you're thinking about telling your story, that's going to feel really uncomfortable. Okay? When someone tells us their story, there are things that are important to them. We honor those things. We value those things. We take notes about those things. But we're using them for purposes that are very intentional. And so it might be that this particular thing that happened is beautiful. Maybe it needs to be its own story, but trying to cram it into another story that has that thin red line going through it of change, agent of change, and after the change, it becomes a distraction. And I'm ADHD, so I have to minimize distractions, right? So if it takes me off somewhere else, then I've disconnected from the emotion that we're trying to gain from the story itself. When somebody reads this story, the goal is for them to know without a shadow of a doubt that their generosity as a person, as a participant, as a giver, as a supporter, helped make that possible. God used them to make this change possible. And anything that doesn't tell that part of the story doesn't go in the story. It can be a quote somewhere on social media. We can some fun little like anecdote later, but the story itself is streamlined and it has a purpose. Okay? So that's what I try. So if somebody says a quote, for those of you who end up doing this a lot, I am to the point now I can write the story as I'm doing the interview. Like I know, oh, I'm going to use that quote, or oh, I'm not going to use that quote. There's my change. There's my agent of change. When I edit your stories, I'm going to circle the change. I'm going to circle the agent of change. That's the first thing I'm going to do is look for those things. And so as I'm listening to the story now, I know I'm going to use that quote, because that quote right there captured the need before they came or engaged with Emmanuel. You're going to get to the point where you know that, right? But maybe they said it kind of awkwardly. And so if I have any journalists in the room, I did have a church that had a ton of journalists. They were like, I have to put all the ums and the likes and the pauses and everything in the quote. That is not what this is, okay? It's okay to clean up the quotes so that they're not distractions, okay? And so what I'll do is I'll say it back to them. I'll write it the way and then they say, yeah. And then I'm like, okay, I can use that, right? Because they've given me permission. Okay? So that's the kind of the interview piece of it. And it feels like it's the scariest part. It's really the best part. It really is the best part. You're going to love it. Okay, so writing the story. Also, if I have any journalist people in the room, this is completely different than writing for journalism. It's also, pastor friends, different from writing a sermon. Okay? So what we're going to do, story structure. The first thing we're going to do is identify the person in 1 or 2 sentences. 1 or 2 sentences that give me an image of who that person is. Because here's the thing, you know the person you interviewed, but if we're telling a story about somebody at Parks or community, there may be somebody in one of the other connections that don't know them. And so really quickly, we have to help them connect to who that person is and have a visual. People need visuals. So very quickly, sentences, see, these are not long stories, okay? 2 to 4 sentences about before the change. Before the change. That's really important. We're going to spend time there. And that also can be a part of the identity, right? So, and then the agent of change, 2 to 6 sentences about how the congregation, how God works through the congregation to be the agent of change in the life of that person, right? What specifically happened? What was offered? What was done? Was it a Bible study? Was it a relationship with a person? Was it a meal in a box? Was it a seminary where I am? What was it? Okay. And then after the change, you get 2 to 6 sentences to talk about where they are now. Okay. And be clear about how that's different from where they were before. And then I have the gift there, okay? Depends on where we use this, all right? And how we use it, whether we put these 1 to 3 sentences in there. But the gift then would sound something like, the generosity of the people of Emmanuel have made this change possible. Thank you for. So that may or may not be in there, but the first 4 are always in there. All right, I'm going to pause here before I go into pictures, and let's just see what kind of questions we have. And don't ask me homework questions yet, because I'm going to get to that. I've never gotten permission other than you gave me permission to interview you. You sat down for the interview, which is the permission. If you have other legal ramifications that you need to consider, I would say leave that internally, you can make that decision. But if somebody, actually, yeah, let me hold the rest of my answer to that, because I do have a slide about what to avoid, and that gets to that. Yes, ma'am.
This is sort of building on what Frank was saying. My training is in anthropology, and one of the fundamental rules in anthropology is that you don't keep things away from the people that you interview, the people that you study. So I'm wondering if we couldn't have some notebook in the church office that has all the stories, so that anybody who wants to read what we've written about them can go find it.
Sylvia, hold on a minute. Let's get you on the microphone so everybody can hear.
Yeah,
Did you hear me?
I heard you, but I don't know that everybody did.
And there's people online.
Yeah, there's some folks online. Hi, friends online. Feel forgotten.
Waving back.
Yeah.
I don't feel comfortable with the idea that we tell people that they won't ever see their final stories, whatever we come up with. And I'm wondering if we couldn't have some sort of place in the church office or elsewhere that would just have all the stories assembled, and they could find their stories if they wanted. But it just doesn't seem right to me. It doesn't seem ethical to say, I'm going to write a story about you, but
Yeah,
I
so,
never see it.
oh, that was a little louder. That's a great, thank you. I need to make a clarification because I didn't say that right. So, so they will, everybody's gonna have access to all these stories. We have some really cool plans in place for how these stories are gonna be shared and distributed and used. What I was referring to is like approval of the story. Like to read the story, yes, I approve it. If we hit the goal of 150 stories, which is what we're talking about, that becomes really difficult, just like administratively, but also their what's important to them may be different than what we believe is important for the purposes of what we want to use the story for. I've not had an anthropologist in the room before. That is really fun to hear that piece of it as well. I bet hearing it's not a timeline is hard for you. So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. Okay, yes.
I have another question. I write a lot too, and some people just want to see their story and want to prove it. So what do you say to people that say, oh, no, I want to see this. I want to make sure that you quoted me right. I want to make sure that I came off right. What do you suggest the congregation tell those people?
Yeah, so so it's kind of like a lead, right? Like we're not gonna lead with you have permission. We're not gonna lead with you get to approve. If I'm sitting across from somebody who really does have that desire and they express that to me, I'm also not gonna withhold it from them. I'm not gonna say, oh no, you don't get to do that. Like that's not the deposit, right? And so, but I'm not gonna lead with, now you're not gonna get to approve this. I'm gonna say enough in the interview about capturing the feeling, quoting it back to them, that they feel comfortable with what I've gathered before we leave the conversation. And I know I've done like hundreds of these, and nobody's ever asked me for approval. People who know me and people who don't know me. Yes.
Will my name be in it?
Will your name be in it as the writer or as the person? Yeah, so, okay, actually, you're hitting one of my next slides again. So maybe I will go and then we'll do some more questions so that I can get there, okay? Great. Okay, so and questions tell me what I didn't say. So it's good. It's good that you're asking these things. It tells me where I need to go. All right, so capturing an image. So the image is really important for the story because again, you set it up in those 1 or 2 sentences, but people need images. They need a visual. Everything in the world today is visual, right? And videos are the new thing, and everybody, because they capture our attention when they're moving on social media and we're scrolling through really fast. But these will be in print, and so you can't put a video in them, okay? So we want to make sure that we have one really good visual. So if you look at these two pictures, which picture is your eye drawn to? The top, right? You can see her eyes, you can see the emotion. You know that there's something going on in this child, right? Now these kids on the bottom are super cute, and I bet they had a great Halloween, but they're so far away that I don't connect to them. And our stories are about a person. And so one of the things when I assess communications in a congregation, one of the things I see a lot is, and this picture, like if I stood up here and took a picture of this room, it tells a story. It tells a story about how many people are here, right? But it doesn't tell your story, and it doesn't tell Janet's story, and it doesn't tell Kristen's story and what they got out of it. And so if I'm going to tell Janet's story, I want Janet. I don't want Janet hidden in a room full of all these stories. While you're interviewing someone, go ahead and take a picture, okay? We all have phones, right? Here's a couple little, and this will help you with all your pictures of your grandkids and your kids and everything, right? Your picture, the first thing you do is you clean your lens. Okay, because we put our only fingers over top of them, and then we take a picture and we're like, why is it blurry? It's blurry because your fingerprint's on there. Okay, so clean your lens. There is a setting on your phone if you need a child in your life to help you figure this out. There's no shame in asking. Sometimes our phones are set in what's called like an HEIC setting. Right? I want to see eyes, eyeballs, 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 eyeballs. When you look at the picture, if you don't go straight to their eyeballs, it's not the right picture. Keep taking. Okay? All right. So pictures are important. Pictures make us stop and read. Pictures are the gateway to the story. Their eyes are the gateway to the story. Okay? All right, here's your slide. Tell me your name, friend. Frank. Frank, here's your slide. Okay, so things to avoid, all right? Avoid giving a life history or a timeline. You already heard me say that, right? Okay? Avoid giving the impression when you're writing the story that the person was interviewed. Okay, so we're not going to use language like when I ask the question. We're not involved in the story, okay? We're telling their story. It's about them. It's from their perspective, not from our perspective, okay? Avoid including details that you thought were important, but that don't build the case or that distract from the change or the agent of change. Okay? And then what I want you to remember, and this goes to your question, Frank, to always honor the dignity of the person. Now, I said it doesn't happen very often that I interview somebody that I can't get a story out of them. It does happen that I interview somebody that it reveals trauma or a recognizable past that does not honor them to share that to the masses, okay? That is the point in the interview where I put down my pen and paper and I say, thank you for honoring me by telling your story. I just want to when I tell at Epworth and never used the child's name. Stories, I was like, I can use their names. But then sometimes using their names still revealed too much. Using where they're from revealed too much. And so I had to be very careful about that. And sometimes I would change the name anyway. Sometimes I would change the picture. I wouldn't use a picture of that child, or I would leave the town out, or whatever. First and foremost, of the person. Okay? It might be the best story you've heard. It might be the one story that's going to change how everybody responds. But if it doesn't honor the dignity of that person, friends, you hold that and know that God entrusted it to you. Okay? And then we're going to remember to make the change and the agent of change the focus. Okay? Always, always. The change and the agent of change are the focus. Frank, did that answer your question? Okay. All right. So when we map out our stories, here's the other thing that's really helpful. And this is where the staff are going to be doing a deeper dive. But when we map out our stories, it does a couple things for us as a community of faith. One, it prevents reactionary and panicked messaging. How many of you felt like when COVID hit and you had to cancel church, it was a panic, right? It prevents getting to the end of a year in an organization and not having the money and saying, we need. What happens when we share panicked messaging is we're just sucking the life out of people with our withdrawals. That is not building up the community or the kingdom, okay? So we want to prevent that kind of reactionary panicked messaging. We're going to strategically tell stories around emotional pivot times. And I mentioned that if something's going on in communities, or if there's going to be a family retreat, right? We're going to drop a story about that thing during that time. And that's how we're going to help people know, man, I want to come to that. Be there, right? Because I've heard this story. So it can transition our we need, you should language to this is what comes from being here and from joining us. Okay? It creates a repeatable and a measurable system. You'll be able to track because there'll be some consistency. Builds consistency with donors, with our friends in the community. It builds our annual fund expectations. These are all things that you probably aren't super excited about, and then consistently promotes the congregation. Okay? So the ways that we're going to share the story. Oh, and I lost my anthropologist back there. So somebody tell her this, okay? These are the ways we're going to use the stories. We are not going to hide them under a bushel. No, right? No. We're going to share them in every form of communication that we have. One gets a lot of real estate, all right? It'll be on the website, it'll be in emails, it'll be on social media, we can use it in thank you cards. We're even, yeah, and we're writing a book. Isn't that cool? I'm so excited. This is the first book I get to do it. So we're going to be using the stories in lots and lots of places and in lots of ways so that we can maximize and honor that person's time to tell us the story, but also so the world knows what you're doing and how you're doing it and how God is using you. Okay? All right, so now it's your turn. I want you to all think about one, and staff, you get more. I want you to all think about 1 to 3 people that you think might have a story to tell. Now, here's my funny challenge that I give people. The next 3 people you see, you could ask for an interview. Because they're not going to be here if they don't have a story to tell, friends. They're just going to stop coming, right? So 1 to 3 people that you think have a story to tell, I want you to invite them to a 30-minute interview. My interviews usually take 15 or 20 minutes, okay? When you're getting started, you feel like you need to say an hour, you just go right ahead and say an hour, all right? What we do want to do is make sure people understand an expectation of time. Give yourself more time, not less time. Our tendency is to say less time because we think they'll be more willing to say yes to us. But it won't feel good to them if it takes longer than you think it's going to take. I want you to interview them using the Saga model, and then I want you to draft your stories, okay? Now, there's a caveat to the drafting the stories. So our next training, there is a follow-up training to this. What's gonna happen is you're gonna write your stories. I am going to read all of them, and I'm going to edit them, okay? But I also want you to learn how to do that, okay? Those folks are gonna bubble up to the top. Those people who are really excited and passionate about this, you're gonna bubble up to the top because you have the gifts and the passion and the call for those things, right? And so if you're not that person, it's okay, right? Not everybody in the room has to be that person. But I am gonna do a follow-up 2-hour training live on the screen, at least 2 of the stories, so that you can see, because what I have found is when I talk through the stories and we read them together, I can say, well, where's the change? And somebody will say, oh, it's right here. Well, you know, and we talk about that. And as we do that, we learn how to get closer and closer to what we're trying to accomplish, okay? So that follow-up training, Howard will take care of you all knowing about that. But I just know that you're not writing the stories and then they're in oblivion, right? I am going to read every story that comes out of here so that it's following the model. And it does what it is that we need it to do, okay? But I want, if you're feeling like, yeah, I like this, I can be a storyteller for Emmanuel, I want you to make a point to come to that second training and learn that editing process, because I can't be with you forever. I mean, I would love to, but the goal is to teach you all to do it, okay? So that is the plan. Now you are, I have to show you my cute little doggy. So what questions do you have? If you need that homework slide, I can put it back up there. But I think it's cute. Yeah.
You've been against timelines the whole time. Well, what's the timeline for how?
So my experience is that if we go longer than 3 weeks, people go, oh, I can do that later, and then there's no urgency, and they don't do it right when it's fresh on their minds from the training. And I do think the closer you can get the interview to the training, the better your interview will be, because you'll have that fresh in your mind and you'll be like firing off what you heard, right? And it won't, the longer we go away from it, the more we forget, okay? So, so the second training, it would be really great. I would like you to send me the stories that you have before that training. What I will do at that point is read through enough of them to get the ones that I think will be most helpful for the training. I don't want to use somebody else's story. I want to use and then after that training, then I'll hand them all back to you, let you edit, and then I'll finish your edits of your last edit. And so the 3 weeks for that next training is kind of the sweet spot. If we need to go a little longer, that you all know the calendar and stuff best.
So a follow-up question, I would assume that the people in this room might even want to interview someone else in this room or a
Yeah.
spouse because it's safer, right? Because
Right.
they know what you're doing, and it's a great way to practice before you might interview someone else. So a
Yeah.
spouse, right? Is that what you would expect?
Yeah, so, the spouse, let me think about that. So my instincts, these are just my instincts, are that it would be hard to interview a spouse because you know too much already and you might be expecting what they might say. But if you want to tag team and interview each other in the room, I think that is an excellent them to say the answer I'm expecting. I'm listening really for what their change is and what's important for them. Yes,
So are there any perimeters around who we can interview?
so you can or can't?
Can,
Can.
can we interview people, maybe who are in an agency that we've supported?
You can.
Okay.
So that is a great question. So that I think depends on the relationship with the agency. Okay, so I'm gonna just use what I know already of your community as an illustration. So the organization to feed the folks who are coming into the line, right? But if you've been standing in that line for a year, making deposits with the person that you're handing the food, they're from another agency, essentially, as you hand them the food. But you also have a relationship with that person. And so if they're a person who always high fives or who always asks for prayer or who consistently seeks you out for something when they're on site or something like that, even if they're not coming to worship, I would still say that's an appropriate interview. Did that help?
It did.
Okay.
I didn't know whether we were to focus all on those who come to worship, or could we also work on interview people outside that our worship or individually we have some type of impact.
Yeah, so let me give you another example too, just from what I know of, the last little bit of the ministry. So let's talk about AA, for example, okay? So I wouldn't just walk up to somebody in AA and say, "Can I tell your story?" That's completely inappropriate because that's a trauma-focused ministry that's being offered, right? But you could go to the leader of the AA group and say, "This is a really important part of what we do. And we're working on telling stories. Could we sit down with you and talk about how this partnership has been helpful?" Right? And so that's how I would approach that. What is mission critical for what we're trying to accomplish is that we don't get all stories from one place. Okay? We need stories from all the branches, the whole of Emmanuel. Everything needs to be represented. So if you personally have a little toe in like 3 different programs or ministries or small groups or communities or Bible studies or worships, then don't pick 3 people from one. That might be more comfortable for you, but try to pick 3 people from the different places you have a toe in, okay? So that when we do get the stories back, we don't have like this void of stories from a particular ministry that you offer. Yeah.
I think too, when you mentioned interviewing people, just again,
So what I try to do in that case is deeper dive questions directly to the other person. And then I'll know pretty quickly, yeah, that person's not gonna tell me anything anyway, and that's okay, right? And so sometimes then the story becomes the person of that spouse, that one spouse, even though I interviewed both of them, because that's the story I got. I only got it from the perspective of the one spouse. Sometimes it's, you know, Bill and Jane came together and Jane was feeling this, right? Like, so there's a nod to the fact that they were both in the conversation, essentially, although we don't want it to sound like an interview, but it really was her that told the story. And it is funny. It's never just the guy or just the girl, right? Like, there's always one in the couple who's gonna do the talking. And so, yes, I think that's completely appropriate as well.
And so that I understand too that we are not using anyone's name. We are going to just.
You use their names. Yeah.
You use their names, okay, because we were talking about being careful about using names.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it can be sensitive, so.
If they reveal something.
Okay.
If they reveal something that it will be very clear it's that person that they don't want that thing revealed, then you can, sometimes even in a small community like this, well, it's a big community, but in a close community, that's a better way to say it. In a close community like this, even changing the name and using a stock photo, people are gonna be like, oh, I know exactly who that is. And so that's what you want to avoid, is if sometimes people will let you share that they had something horrible that happened. Sometimes because that is part of their story and it actually honors them to share it because they want it shared, but sometimes they don't. And so that's the difference. Yeah, so here, let me give you an example and then I'm gonna take your question, okay? So one of the stories that I wrote, it was a couple and the man loved horses and he had a couple horses on a farm and he committed suicide. And after he did that, his wife could no longer care for the horses. And so the horses kind of got bounced around a little bit to some different places. And then they ended up in the ministry that I was writing the story for. And the spouse, it was so important to her that those horses were being used for emotional therapy, right? So because he needed that. He needed that. But it also, that was not the story that she had shared with her family and her community. She wasn't ready to release that information into the world. And so he was okay with us sharing the story, but we said died suddenly, right? We changed that one thing, disconnected the story so that it was okay for her to share it in that way. Because it still mattered to her that the horses were being used for therapy. So, so there are little things we can do, but sometimes that's just still too revealing in a close community. Yes, ma'am.
I took a lot of notes, but I don't know if everybody did. Will there be any handout or skeletal overview of what you've talked about?
So you have it.
And the answer to that, the answer to that is yes, we will have materials from this available. We'll actually distribute the PowerPoint via email later on today. We've also got some workbooks that we need to order more copies of, and we will share those. And we will also pull together a couple of bullet points, key takeaways from this conversation. So absolutely.
Okay, here and then here.
You see, we have a number of seasonal people in the congregation and relationships. How do we do that?
Yeah, so I would just call them up.
That's okay.
I would just call them up and
Yeah.
say, you're not here right now, but we miss you and we want to hear your story. And so how about we Zoom?
Good.
And you can Zoom to interview. Mhm. Yep. Yep.
I'm sorry, Lynn. And this may tie into your question because of all of your outside work, but Emmanuel's work within the community is so vital and changes our lives as well as those we touch. All those stories are extremely welcome. Because that is Emmanuel, that is God working through us and touching the lives of others. So effectively any story idea that you've got, if it's God's work through Emmanuel directly or indirectly, let's grab it, let's look at it, and let's see how we can learn from it.
Yeah, and to take a deeper dive into that too, you are Emmanuel. I mean, so if it's one person who's connected even through a Bible study, felt a call to do a particular thing for their neighbor, right? They're not blasting that out into the world, tell everybody they did that. But their relationship to God grew deeper and they recognized a need in their neighbor, and then they did that thing. One of the things we talked about last night, which I love, is that you all have been talking about what it means to be servant leaders outside of here, right? In your jobs as a supervisor, all of those kinds of things. And so if your experience at Emmanuel has helped you carry your faith into your workplace, wow. I mean, that's a powerful story, friends. And that's a story that needs to be told. And so don't discount your own stories in that as well. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to absolutely confirm in my mind that when we talk about the ask, it's both money and, because I see the hands and feet just as important as money.
Yes.
I realize there's a lot of people that might see that differently.
Yes. Yes, it is. And the other thing too is you all are writing the C and the A. Okay? The G and the last A are, remember, we're 20%. And so, but yes, when we tell the story about, for example, the people who are volunteering at Park, and sorry, I was at Park yesterday, so I keep talking about that because that's my closest connection. Maybe that volunteering is what changed that, right? Or maybe answering that call, and maybe somebody that they met there did as well. And so we have an opportunity for this new thing. We're looking for new people to decide if they feel called to support this new kind of endeavor. Or we need more because something is growing. We need more people or something like that. Instead of saying we need more people, what we then do is we say, let me tell you how this changed me or changed this person, and we invite them to join us. And so it is all the ways that we respond to God's yes, all the ways.
And I think, Lynn, it's worth emphasizing. Time, treasure, and talent are all gifts and resources and are what we share. So all of those stories, not only dollars, but time and talent, really. Thank you.
Yep. Great. Yes.
Just another question that I'd like, your thoughts on. Emmanuel has been, praise the Lord, here for 60 years. So as we're identifying stories, and we also had sort of COVID, which kind of disrupted all of us. Mm-hmm. So many of us, I think, Carol, I'm looking at you right now, Stephen Ministry. She heads Stephen Ministry. We have 20 years of Stephen Ministry here. Mm-hmm. As we're thinking about people, should we be thinking within, the people that have touched our lives within the last few years? What's the benefit of that? And yet not losing the fact that there's some powerful things that have happened in the past, right? Mm-hmm. That have been triggers for where we're going, right? Because this is about the future. and yet we don't want to let go of the past. So your thoughts on, here's a real attempt. If I have identified 6 people and 3 of them are more relevant, should I take those 3? Right? And relevant
You
in the
should
sense,
do all
relevant
6.
in the sense of the time.
Yes.
You should interview all 6 if you've identified 6.
Yeah.
No, or you should have somebody tag team with you who's having trouble thinking of people. So I get what you're saying. Let me address that. Yes.
Just an example, Pastor Steve got a call out of the blue from the pastor that planted this church.
Oh,
And
wow.
so he shared that story during the sermon.
Uh-huh.
Would that be a relevant
That's
story?
exactly what I'm going to.
Yeah. So what I would say though, okay, so there's 2 things happening here. First is, don't invent the story from a conversation that you had in the past.
Okay.
So if that person called in, it was a story and it got shared, if it can't be written and following the model, right? Then, and not that the model is like the end all be all, but there is importance in what we're trying to accomplish through the model, right? Is that there is a purpose and a change. So if the idea of that conversation was, oh, it's just so great to see where you've come, well, there's no change in that. That's just it's great to see where you've come, right? But if his time here created a change in his life that he then took out into other ministry because of the relationships he made here, then that's worth calling him back and saying, hey, can I interview you? Like, and it was so great to talk to you, but I really want to talk to you for a specific purpose. And we're working on telling the stories, and we'd like for your experience here and how being at Emmanuel changed you to be a part of that story. You see the difference?
I do. So what I'm hearing is, in a sense, look at all the stories, but filter them through the process.
Yes.
And then determine which
Yes.
one's relevant to the purpose that we're trying to.
Right. And then the other thing is, okay, so to Jim's point about stories, so you are not just who you are today, right? God has been working and moving in this community for, I would even say, before the 60 years, right? To get it moving and going and doing and all the things. And so it is appropriate to talk about how we are connected to the saints who come before us. It is appropriate for some people, the simplicity of being not alone and being a part of something that is bigger than them creates change and helps them see beyond themselves, right? So a sampling of the different ministries, we also want a sampling of who Emmanuel is as a whole, and that does include your past. Do we call up somebody who did something really cool, 50 years ago and then got angry and left? That's not the same thing, right? You see? So we're looking at, I'm serious. And so, but yes, I do think, and I think the other thing is too, when we talk to those folks who were here in the beginning, we can ask them how it's changed them to see and how their faith has grown in those however many years, but also how Emmanuel has helped change and shape the larger community in all of those years. And I think that's part of the story as well. Yeah. Did that help, Jim?
Yeah,
And if you have 6 names, go for it. Or if you're not comfortable, partner with somebody. Don't just let those names get flushed down the toilet, right? Like let's pay attention, because I would venture to say the Spirit is placing that name on your heart for a reason. Okay. Yes.
Basically, what criteria do we use to choose the people that we want to interview? It's a personal preference, and at the same time, once you made these choices, we don't judge these people. We interview them, get their story, not picture with our story.
Correct. What's your name? Patrick. Well said. It is not about us. That's exactly right. It is about them. So, okay, so criteria wise, the truth is, friends, you could walk into your worship on Sunday and ask the first 3 people that you see their story, and it would be completely appropriate. Okay? So I don't want you to overthink who you interview. I want you to think about the people who are coming to your heart immediately, and I want you to just start writing them down and start there, because everybody has a story. Okay? And everybody's. Yes, sir.
I was just thinking in numbers. If we are here 25 people, times 6 give us to the goal. 100.
Yeah.
That's it. Just to think about.
Maybe I heard 3.
I love numbers.
We have 3 over here.
Yeah, I
Don't forget the people zooming.
Yeah, and there are people.
Yeah, we got people.
Yeah, so I do think, you know, one of my favorite, my husband laughs at me, one of my favorite things to say is challenge accepted. And what I have heard so far from the people in this community that I've met is that over the years, you have accepted the challenge. You have answered the call. You have done the hard thing. It might have taken, you're getting there if you're not already there. And so don't be afraid of a simple little interview. Okay? Here and then here.
I know that a lot of people, I write a lot, as I said, and a lot of people, when I ask them for information, they go, oh, I can't write, I'm not a writer. And I go, don't even think about that. Give me 2 sentences. Give me 3 sentences, you know, to say like write a story. So you kind of don't think about it as write a story. You just write those 3 sentences, those 2 sentences about each of those names.
Yep.
Then you can weave it together.
Yes.
Through the editing. So it's not so much of like writing that story, it's just getting those 2 or 3 sentences that touch your heart. Because it's the thing that pulls at your heart that makes you go, come on, that other people.
Your feeling that you're capturing. That's exactly right, Sue. So if the story part is the part that's tripping you up, then only think about talking to your friend. And hearing, and then what I do when I am taking notes is if I hear the change, I will put a little C in my notes. And then when I pick up on what the agent is, I'll put a little A so that when I'm going back, and then you're just simply take those words and turning them right into the sentences for the structure. It really is not, it feels bigger than it is when you're in it, and when you're in it, I promise you it feels really good. It feels really good.
So,
okay, Rick had a question. Pastor Rick had a question.
So I would assume that we should announce Sunday for the next 3 or 4 weeks. To capture stories. What else would you say in an announcement like that? Would be helpful to kind of set the, prepare the turf.
So that people don't run away.
Sure. Till the ground here a little. So I think the same thing that I would say to a person when I was asking them for the interview, to say, hey, you know, as a community, as a whole community, we are, whatever it is you've shared, I saw an email, I feel like I saw an email go out about about this, and did that go to everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so to reiterate, like to remind people that that's what you're doing, that had the next step, you've had the training, and that there are some brave souls who are going to answer the call to gather stories for the community. And so they may be asking you, and we hope you will receive them with grace, because it might be a scary thing to do. But also, if you feel like you have a story to share, to search out I would say probably the staff person that you're closest, you feel comfortable with or closest to, and say, hey, can I share my story? And then let them, and then interview that person.
So could I ask on Sunday, for example, that those who have been to the workshop could raise their hands or to?
I think that's a lovely idea. Yeah, challenge by choice. Yep. If you're sitting here going, oh my gosh, I can't wait to get out of here, this is freaking me out, then don't raise your hand on Sunday. It's
I think
okay.
it might be a nice, an efficient use of time after the service, just to have someone, so let's grab a couple sandwiches and just go, around the tables there, and you can have
Absolutely.
maybe even 1 or 2 interviews done this Sunday.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great idea. Yeah. Yes,
I
ma'am.
was thinking of sharing them.
I lost.
To the staff is to have everyone who attended to send an email out to show us how to change the HEIC to the JPEG. So that way we have that, because I don't know how to do that. I mean, everyone thinks I do.
Okay. Okay.
So I sent them to Jennifer and it.
Okay, and your phone may already be set in JPEG.
Mine's not.
Okay. So,
And I don't think, I get a lot of those photos in, I just open them and save them as a JPEG, so it's not a really big deal. I have clients that send me, all kinds of photos.
okay.
That's right.
It's literally 3 steps on your phone.
Okay.
Super easy.
Yeah,
So you may as well be talking Greek.
yeah, that's okay. So if you know how to do that, raise your hand. Do you know how to do it? Okay, so after, just bring your phone to Shantae. Bring your phone to Shantae. She'll help you.
You're the only one that raised your hand.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I figured it out sitting here.
Oh.
So that is a miracle and God's grace. That's all I'm
There you
saying.
go. So it's possible.
Realistic there.
And yeah, don't
It's
fret
really easy.
about it. It's
Thank you.
okay. We'll get that figured out. You do have people on staff who are very good. But we're gonna print this, And so people will appreciate that you've taken the time to take a good picture of them if it's going to be in something that becomes historic, I promise.
So I'll be like, I'll send you my headshot.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's really not what we're going for. Yeah.
So we've got lunch for everyone here at 1 o'clock. And we welcome you to sit around and chat. We want to thank everyone who's on Zoom and their patience with it freezing and whatnot. It's been a much better experience actually live and in person, unfortunately. Sandwiches at 1 o'clock. We're going to do a sample interview. So Mitzi will lead an interview with our dear friend Edie Cole.
The courageous Edie.
Exactly.
I didn't realize that, but okay.
Yeah. And then at 1:30, Mitzi's going to lead a interview with combined Pastor Jose and Pastor Will. So we'll capture both of those on Zoom and record them and share them. But anyone who wishes to stay and watch is extremely welcome. Gina, actually, good reason for you guys to stay and eat a sandwich and join us for lunch. Gina went to print out the PowerPoint. So that way, if you wait long enough, you'll actually have the PowerPoint in your hand as you leave. Super. This is the start of something great. Mitzi threw out the number 150 stories. That would be fantastic. I mean, given the history of Emmanuel and all the different things that are going on just each day and each week, 150 stories actually is a very reasonable number. I wouldn't be shocked if we had significantly more than that.
Howard, why don't you also give the bigger picture of how this storytelling piece is concerning the feasibility study, which then leans into the possibility of a campaign next year.
Sure, that sounds great, Rick. Thank you. So we'll be doing a feasibility study after we start sharing these stories. Because if we're looking, and the feasibility study will do a couple of things. It basically will come down to a conclusion: is a capital campaign feasible? And what is a number that is reasonable? And some of the questions that come into the answer of yes or no and the dollar amounts is how well do people understand what Emmanuel is doing? And what is Emmanuel doing? And is it changing lives? And so if we can capture and share these stories over the course of the next few months and actually change a little bit the ways in which we communicate, utilizing the concepts of deposits versus withdrawals. So hopefully in our language, you won't see that we're short by X dollars in our budget, please send a check. You'll see something that is much more deposit language rather than withdrawal language. So there will be subtle changes that you guys are on the inside track on. And actually, you know, sometimes there's so many pieces of communication that come out of Emmanuel. If you see something, as you know, members and friends and engaged folks, that sounds more withdrawal language than deposit, just shoot a quick email to Gina or Teresa or to Jennifer or Vivian, and we'll change that, because this is a growing experience for everyone. Next 3-4 months, collecting stories and sharing stories. And like we said, they'll include pictures. We're going to try and capture some videos as well, as multidimensional as possible. As Mitzi said, we're looking to put together a book, and it'll definitely be in digital form. and it'll most likely also be in a printed form. So that will be a lot of fun, and we will work through that together. So that way it is a group project that we're all engaged in. It's interesting because Jim brought up this great question about heritage and history. And that is vital. Institutional knowledge and respect for history is so, so important. And the question in the feasibility study and the book itself, the question is how does that fit in? Because we kind of look at we want to say, look, this is a manual. This is a manual today, and this is where we're going, like the fire of the vision. And the challenge, and we'll leave this to Mitzi, Mike, and the great folks at GSB to tell us how do we build in also these heritage, historical, institutional stories so that way they are all complementary. And, you know, as the Spirit leads us, I'm sure we will be successful in figuring that out. So any and all stories, both about yesterday, last week, last month, and even going back in time, as long as they fit into the framework. And anything that is Emmanuel related, one step, two Habitat for Humanity in the 60 houses. So natural story is one or two families that have benefited from those houses, you know? And then when we're thinking about it, well, we've got volunteers also at Habitat who actually swing hammers. So we may want to do a story with the volunteers that swing the hammer. And what does that do for them? You know, and then, you know, there's lots of different avenues and ways of looking at it. So be creative, be fearless. The more, the better. And we'll be surprised as to how wonderful the outcome is. Teresa, you want to say something? Share something?
Yeah, I think you guys have probably done a great job covering it.
All right. So, and feasibility study wise, will run probably November to January at this point in time, based on where we're at in this process. And we expect a presentation towards the end of January, let us say, as to, you know, is it feasible to do a capital campaign and to what extent? And then we'll launch into a campaign, a quiet phase, and then a exciting phase. But at the same point in time, as we said, stewardship is not only dollars, it's time and it's talent. And as we're talking about today, we're talking about means of communication. And so hopefully the end result, roll forward 24 months, is not only financial success, but we see a significant change in how we communicate in terms of language and content in our materials. And we also see a change, you know, in the culture of the broad group of Emmanuel to better reflect, you know, God's work in our midst and what we're doing and through us and with us. So a lot of different moving pieces, but patience, fortitude, each day at a time, and we will get there. This is a great place. Rick mentioned yesterday evening, you know, looking around this room, we have such intellectual talent, and we've got such experience in terms of, you know, church engagement and church leadership and in development and this and that. So our challenge, you know, as the Emmanuel executive leadership team, Teresa, Jim, myself, Vivian, Rick, and Pastor Steve, our challenge is kind of, you know, gathering all that great wisdom and all those gifts and helping those gifts to move us forward into, you know, our next position in place. So anyway, with that, Pastor Jose, if you actually, Glenn, if you don't mind, can I put you on the spot and ask you to do a closing prayer for this session? and a lunch, a prayer for the food.
All in
Please.
one.
All in one, exactly. We'll give you 15 seconds to.
We thank you, Lord, for your presence with us this day. We sense that you are here. You are guiding us, even as your Holy Spirit is guiding the ministry of Emmanuel Church over these many years. Help us then as we go about our ways to be listeners, to hear, to ask, and to tell the stories. The stories of Jesus and his love, the stories of people's needs being met, the stories of people growing and maturing in their faith. Now we ask that you be with us as we fellowship together, as we eat, as we go about our ways in this day. We pray all of this in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
Amen. Thank you. Awesome. Round of applause for you guys and for our friends and family who are on live stream. Thank you, guys. I'm going to turn it back on at 1 o'clock, the live stream, if anybody wants to join back in. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Adriana.
Yes. Great to see you.